Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 243. Chapter 243. For the last 2 days, ever since leaving home, Pierre had been living in the empty house of his deceased benefactor, Bazdiev. This is how it happened. When he woke up on the morning after his return to Moscow and his interview with Count Rostopchin, he could not for some time make out where he was and what was expected of him. When he was informed that among others awaiting him in his reception room there was a Frenchman who had brought a letter from his wife, the Countess Helene, he felt suddenly overcome by that sense of confusion and hopelessness to which he was apt to succumb. He felt that everything was now at an end. All was in confusion and crumbling to pieces. That nobody was right or wrong. The future held nothing, and there was no escape from this position. Smiling unnaturally and muttering to himself, he first sat down on the sofa in an attitude of despair, then rose, went to the door of the reception room, and peeped through the crack, returned flourishing his arms, and took up a book. His major domo came in a second time to say that the Frenchman who had brought the letter from the Countess was very anxious to see him, if only for a minute, and that someone from Bazdiev's widow had called to ask Pierre to take charge of her husband's books, as she herself was leaving for the country. "Oh yes, in a minute. Wait. Or no, of course. Go, and I will come directly," Pierre replied to the major domo. But as soon as the man had left the room, Pierre took up his hat, which was lying on the table, and went out of his study by the other door. There was no one in the passage. He went along the whole length of this passage to the stairs, and frowning and rubbing his forehead with both hands, went down as far as the first landing. The hall porter was standing at the front door. From the landing where Pierre stood, there was a second staircase leading to the back entrance. He went down that staircase and out into the yard. No one had seen him. But there were some carriages waiting, and as soon as Pierre stepped out of the gate, the coachman and the yard porter noticed him and raised their caps to him. When he felt he was being looked at, and he behaved like an ostrich which hides its head in a bush in order not to be seen, he hung his head, and quickening his pace, went down the street. Of all the affairs awaiting Pierre that day, the sorting of Joseph Bazdiev's books and papers appeared to him the most necessary. He hired the first cab he met and told the driver to go to the Patriarch's Ponds, where the widow Bazdiev's house was. Continually turning around to look at the rows of loaded carts that were making their way from all sides of Moscow, and balancing his bulky body so as not to slip out of the ramshackle old vehicle, Pierre, experiencing the joyful feeling of a boy escaping from school, began to talk to his driver. The man told him that arms were being distributed today at the Kremlin, and that tomorrow everyone would be out beyond the 3 hill gates, and a great battle would be fought there. Having reached the Patriarch's Ponds, Pierre found Bazdiev's house, where he had not been for a long time past. He went up to the gate. Gerasim, that sallow, beardless old man Pierre had seen at Churka's 5 years before with Joseph Bazdiev, came out in answer to his knock. "At home?" asked Pierre. "Owing to the present state of things, Sofia Danilovna have gone to the Torzhak estate, with the children, Your Excellency." "I will come in all the same. I have to look through the books," said Pierre. "Be so good as to step in. Makar Alexievich, the brother of my late master, may the kingdom of heaven be his, has remained here, but he is in a weak state, as you know," said the old servant. Pierre knew that Makar Alexievich was Joseph Bazdiev's half-insane brother and a hard drinker. Yes, I know. Let us go in," said Pierre, and entered the house. A tall, bald-headed old man with a red nose wearing a dressing gown and with old galoshes on his bare feet, stood in the anteroom. On seeing Pierre, he muttered something angrily and went away along the passage. "He was a very clever man, but has now grown quite feeble, as your honor sees," said Gerasim. "Will you step into the study?" Pierre nodded. "As it was sealed up, so it has remained, but Sofia Danilovna gave orders that if anyone should come from you, they were to have all the books." Pierre went into that gloomy study which he had entered with such trepidation in his benefactor's lifetime. The room, dusty and untouched since the death of Joseph Bazdiev, was now even gloomier. Gerasim opened one of the shutters and left the room on tiptoe. Pierre went around the study, approached the cupboard in which the manuscripts were kept, and took out what had once been one of the most important, the Holy of Holies of the order. This was the authentic Scotch axe, with Bazdiev's notes and explanations. He sat down at the dusty writing table, and having laid the manuscripts before him, opened them out, closed them, finally pushed them away, and resting his head on his hand, sank into meditation. Gerasim looked cautiously into the study several times, and saw Pierre always sitting in the same attitude. More than 2 hours passed, and Gerasim took the liberty of making a slight noise at the door to attract his attention, but Pierre did not hear him. "Is the cabman to be discharged, your honor?" "Oh, yes," said Pierre, rousing himself and rising hurriedly. "Look here," he added, taking Gerasim by a button of his coat, looking down at the old man with moist, shining, and ecstatic eyes. "I say, do you know that there's going to be a battle tomorrow?" "We heard so," replied the man. "I beg you not to tell anyone who I am, and to do what I ask you." "Yes, your excellency," replied Gerasim. "Will you have something to eat?" "No, but I want something else. I want peasant clothes and a pistol," said Pierre, unexpectedly blushing. "Yes, your excellency," said Gerasim, after thinking for a moment. All the rest of that day, Pierre spent alone in his benefactor's study. Gerasim heard him pacing restlessly from one corner to another and talking to himself, and he spent the night on a bed made up for him there. Gerasim, being a servant who in his time had seen many strange things, accepted Pierre's taking up his residence in the house without surprise, and seemed pleased to have someone to wait on. That same evening, without even asking himself what they were wanted for, he procured a coachman's coat and a cap for Pierre, and promised to get him the pistol next day. Makar Alexievitch came twice that evening, shuffling along in his galoshes as far as the door, and stopped and looked ingratiatingly at Pierre. But as soon as Pierre turned toward him, he wrapped his dressing gown around him with a shamefaced and angry look and hurried away. It was when Pierre, wearing the coachman's coat and Gerasim had procured for him and had disinfected by steam, was on his way with the old man to buy the pistol at the Shirkarev market, that he met the Rostovs. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 243 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 243. Total Nihilistic Existential Breakdown. We've all been there before. He felt suddenly overcome by that sense of confusion and hopelessness to which he was apt to succumb. He felt that everything was now at an end. All was in confusion and crumbling to pieces, that nobody was right or wrong, the future held nothing, and there was no escape from this position. One can certainly sympathize with Pierre here, considering all he's been through lately. He has experienced firsthand modernity's foremost triumph, industrialized warfare. His best friend has been killed, he thinks. His country is being overrun by a nation most famous for its pastry production, and his wife is now a papist. It's almost as demoralizing as being a Mets fan. So when he slinks out of his house in such a horrible mood, it's not too much of a surprise. He heads over to Bazdiev's place to take charge of his late benefactor's books. Pierre is met there by a servant named Gerasim, who will, probably, go on to take up a new position in the house of Ivan Ilyevich Golovin. For the time being, however, Gerasim waits on Pierre as Pierre figures out what to do with Bazdiev's books. Unfortunately, Pierre's foul mood gets the better of him. Something rotten hatches in his mind. He orders Gerasim to fetch him a peasant's garb and a pistol. That's not a request typically associated with a well-balanced mental disposition, even for Russians. Something is up with Pierre. The vagaries and vicissitudes of everyday life can be severe, even when they don't include Napoleonic War. During trying times, though, it's best not to overreact. Recall instead the practice of premeditation malorum. It's preferable to be ready than to be ruined. Daily meditation. Whatever you have been expecting for some time comes as less of a shock. Seneca, Letters from a Stoic. All right, so that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 243 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. All right, tomorrow we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 244. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.